The first sound I remember that night was the soft chime of crystal touching crystal, followed by a wave of polite laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. You could tell the difference between laughter that meant amusement and the kind that meant performance. I had been to enough of these corporate dinners to know which one this was. The chandelier above the table threw a warm, expensive light that made the silverware glow like treasure. Each reflection looked like a tiny version of the people sitting around me, smiling at nothing and pretending to enjoy everything. Le Calais was the kind of restaurant that whispered power through restraint. Velvet walls, soft jazz, quiet service. Nothing flashy, everything controlled. The kind of place where billion-dollar contracts were toasted over a dessert no one actually ate. I had come here as part of the delegation from my firm, the Roland Group, to celebrate our partnership with Helix Dynamics, one of the largest technology investment companies in London. It was supposed to be a formality, a ritual of smiles and toasts. Nothing more. That was before the remark that changed everything. It came from across the table, delivered with perfect posture and a voice sweet enough to coat poison. Eleanor Vance, the wife of Helix's CEO, lifted her glass halfway and said, as if idly, "You have such a gift, Collins, it must be nice to make spreadsheets look like art." The comment floated for a second, then settled like ash. My fork hovered over my plate. The man next to me gave an uncomfortable cough. Someone further down the table chuckled too loudly. The meaning was clear enough, an insult delivered as flattery. Eleanor's diamond bracelet caught the light when she smiled. "Richard always says that numbers are boring until someone dresses them up. You must have an eye for color." Her husband, Richard Vance, the CEO of Helix Dynamics, gave a polite laugh, the kind that told you he had no idea what she just said or didn't care enough to stop her. He reached for his wine and added, "Presentation is key in consulting, isn't it? The board loves a pretty chart." Pretty chart. The phrase burned quietly inside me, though I kept my expression serene. I smiled, nodded, and took a small sip of wine to buy time. I had learned long ago that silence was often louder than outrage. The trick was to let people believe they were winning the moment because they rarely noticed when you started planning the endgame. I glanced at my managing partner, Daniel Cross, sitting diagonally opposite. He gave me the tiniest shrug, the corporate version of ignore it. That shrug told me more about where I stood than Eleanor's words ever could. Daniel had been my mentor once. He had been the one to tell me that I was the best mind in the firm and the future of strategic finance. Tonight, he couldn't meet my eyes. A server refilled my glass. The conversation at the table resumed its artificial rhythm. Markets, mergers, charity galas, weather, words that meant nothing, exchanged like currency. Across from me, Eleanor laughed at something her husband whispered. Her laugh was a performance too, high, deliberate, designed to draw attention. I wondered if she practiced it. I wondered what it was like to believe that cruelty was charm. To my left sat a man I had only met that evening, introduced as Dylan Cross, our new liaison from the States. No relation to Daniel, but he had the same easy grin, the same confidence of someone who had been told the world would adjust itself to him. He leaned toward me slightly and said, "You know, Eleanor has a point. Simplicity is power. The trick is not to overthink strategy." I turned my head slowly, studying him. He looked mid-30s, immaculate suit, dark hair slicked back, and a smile that had practiced itself in many mirrors. "Overthinking," I said softly, "is just thinking done properly." He chuckled, maybe to hide discomfort, maybe because he didn't get it. "Sure. Still, I'm all for trimming the fat. Efficiency over elaboration, right?" I tilted my head. "That depends on what you're cutting." For a moment, our eyes met and something passed between us. Not attraction, not hostility, something sharper, more instinctive. Predators recognizing predators. Eleanor must have sensed she had started something. She leaned forward with the faux curiosity of someone used to dominating a room. "Tell me, Collins, what exactly do you do again? Daniel said you handle operational models?" I smiled politely. "I handle strategic modeling and financial structure design, the frameworks that decide whether a company grows or collapses." "Ah," she said, the syllable dripping with mock sympathy. "So the spreadsheets again." I could feel Daniel tense beside her. He tried to interject, "Collins actually," but I raised a hand slightly, stopping him. "Yes, Eleanor," I said, still smiling. "The spreadsheets, they're where reality hides when people are too busy talking about vision." For a moment, the table went silent. Even the clink of cutlery stopped. Then someone coughed and the conversation awkwardly restarted. Eleanor didn't reply. Her mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She turned back to her husband, but her cheeks had lost a little color. That was enough for me. Dinner continued, course after course, each more beautiful and tasteless than the last. I barely touched my food. I had no appetite left. Not for the meal, not for the company. I watched the dynamics unfold like a play. Richard checking his phone every few minutes, Daniel flattering him about expansion forecasts, Dylan charming Alina with stories about his time in New York. Every so often, his gaze would flick toward me, assessing, measuring. He didn't know yet that I was doing the same. When dessert was announced, a delicate chocolate soufflé with gold flakes, I excused myself to the restroom. My heels clicked softly against marble floors. The mirror reflected a composed woman in a dark emerald dress, hair neatly tied, makeup subtle. Professional, precise, forgettable. Exactly as they wanted me to be. I leaned closer to the mirror and whispered, "They think you decorate spreadsheets. Let them." Outside the restroom, I stopped for a moment in the hallway. Waiters glided silently past carrying silver trays. The world outside was still raining lightly, drops tracing elegant lines on the restaurant's glass walls. London in winter always felt like it was holding its breath. I took out my phone. One name blinked on the screen, Marian Hale. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 2 years, but she was the only person who had ever told me I had the mind of an architect and the patience of a hunter. I typed a short message, having dinner with Richard Vance and his charming entourage. Their view of strategy is decorative. Coffee soon? I sent it and slipped the phone back into my clutch. By the time I returned to the table, the soufflé had arrived, steaming softly under the glow of the chandeliers. Alina was telling a story about renovating their estate in Surrey. "You just cannot find craftsmen who understand Italian marble anymore," she sighed. "Everything has to be done twice. I told Richard it's better to pay more up front." I sat down quietly. Richard smiled indulgently, the way men smile when their wives say something they find trivial. Dylan laughed at the right moment. Daniel poured himself another glass of wine. "Leaving so soon?" Alina asked when she saw me reach for my coat. I smiled. "Early start tomorrow. Some of us have numbers to chase." Her laughter followed me out of the room, brittle as glass. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I stood under the awning for a moment, watching cars glide through the wet street. My phone buzzed, a new message, from Marian, my office. 7 a.m. bring everything. I stared at the message, the city lights reflecting in my screen. Something sharp and electric moved through me. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. I arrived home past midnight. The city had gone quiet, but my mind hadn't. My apartment was minimalist, all cool lines and glass, my only indulgence. I slipped out of the dress, hung it neatly, and poured myself a small glass of scotch. The first sip burned, the way clarity should. I opened my laptop and reviewed the financial frameworks I had spent months constructing for Helix Dynamics. 42 interconnected models, each mapping supply chain dependencies, currency risk, and market volatility. They weren't just spreadsheets, they were an X-ray of Helix's entire operational body. And somewhere in those veins, I had found weak spots Richard Vance didn't even know existed. Dylan would see none of it. The email I had sent Marian had no attachments, no summaries, just an invitation. Because I knew that in this world, power wasn't about what you shared, it was about what you withheld. I saved a backup of the models onto an encrypted drive labeled Horizon, a small act, invisible but irreversible. Then I closed the laptop, finished my drink, and looked out the window. Across the river, the Helix headquarters glowed through the mist. I could almost see the top-floor office where Richard Vance had built his empire. A glass kingdom built on numbers he didn't understand. "They think you color inside the lines," I whispered to the dark. "Time to show them who drew the blueprint." Morning came like steel. Gray sky, thin rain. I dressed in black, tied my hair back, and walked through the city to Marian's office near St. Paul's. She had been my mentor during my graduate years, a woman whose calm intellect could silence entire boards. When I entered her waiting room, her assistant simply nodded and opened the door. Marian stood by the window, a cup of tea in her hand. Her silver hair caught the morning light like wire. She turned, smiled slightly. "Still take your coffee black, Collins." "Yes," I said, "and strong." She gestured for me to sit. "I saw your message. Tell me what happened." I told her everything, the dinner, Alina's remarks, Dylan's opportunistic charm, Daniel's silence. Marian listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she placed her cup down gently. "Alina Vance," she said slowly. "Do you know she used to be a boutique interior designer? Married Richard 5 years ago. Thinks she understands business because she decorates the rooms it happens in." I allowed myself a faint smile. "That explains the taste. But Dylan Cross," she continued, "he's more interesting. I checked his file when Helix mentioned him last week, moved around a lot, Fast promotions, faster exits, the kind of man who leaves smoke behind and calls it innovation. He's dangerous, I said. He's desperate, she corrected. There's a difference. Desperate men are easy to predict. It's the calm ones you have to watch. I leaned forward. What are you thinking? Marian folded her hands. I'm thinking Helix is about to announce a restructuring plan. They want to trim what they call redundant partnerships. Richard, been under pressure from the board, if he fails this quarter, he's out. That means people around him will start looking for someone to blame. Me, she nodded. Or him if you move first. There it was, the first spark of the plan neither of us had to name. She stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a folder. Inside are public filings, supplier contracts, exchange rate data for the Asian branch. I want you to look at the gaps. If your projections are correct, there's at least £40 million unaccounted for in operational losses. That's not inefficiency, that's concealment. I took the folder. You think they're hiding losses? I think, she said, looking at me sharply, that Richard and his new pet consultant are trying to create a mirage of recovery before the next board review. If that mirage collapses, someone will fall with it. The question is who? The rain tapped softly against the window. I said quietly, then let's make sure it's not me. Marian smiled, slow and deliberate. I thought you'd say that. Keep me updated. And Collins? Yes. Next time someone calls your work decoration, remember this. The person who designs the foundation always owns the building. By the time I left her office, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing slivers of pale sky. I walked without rushing, my mind already sorting through the next steps. Dylan would try to move quickly. Men like him always did. He'd simplify the data, rebrand my models as his, and present it to the board as a miracle cure. I would let him. Because every empire built on false numbers collapses under the weight of true ones. At the corner cafe, I stopped for coffee and wrote a single line in my notebook. Every insult is a blueprint. I didn't yet know how far this blueprint would reach. But I knew where it started, right there at that dinner table, under the chandelier light, with a single careless sentence about pretty spreadsheets. Some insults fade. That one built an empire, and I was just getting started. The next morning began with the sound of my phone vibrating across the kitchen counter before the sun had even climbed past the buildings. It was Daniel. The message was brief and unnervingly polite. Emergency alignment meeting, 9 o'clock, Helix account only. That tone always meant trouble. I stared at it for a long second before replying with a simple on my way. The smell of coffee filled the apartment, but I left it untouched. My mind was already running ahead, faster than my body could keep up. The office stood near the river, a tower of glass pretending to be transparent. The receptionist greeted me by name, her eyes flicking nervously to the elevator lights as if she knew something she wasn't supposed to tell me. When the doors opened, the hum of conversation stopped. People turned, some smiled too quickly, others avoided my gaze. In the corporate world, silence was the first whisper of betrayal. I walked into the conference room, heels quiet against the polished floor. The air smelled of stale perfume and coffee that had been brewed too long ago. Daniel stood at the front of the room beside the digital screen. His smile was the kind used in funerals. "Good morning, team," he said. "Helix Dynamics has requested a more integrated approach going forward. They want closer collaboration between our analytics division and their new liaison, Mr. Dylan Cross." He gestured toward the far end of the table. Dylan was there, of course, perfectly relaxed, his jacket folded neatly over the chair, that confident smile again. He looked like someone arriving to claim property he already owned. Daniel continued, "Dylan will be leading the restructuring of the Helix strategy to make sure we meet their evolving expectations." The word restructuring hit like ice water. My hands stayed still on the table. Dylan stood, buttoned his jacket, and projected his voice as though he were on a stage. "I've reviewed the current materials prepared by Collins and her team. Impressive work, really. Very thorough, maybe too thorough. What we need is clarity, something digestible at the executive level." He tapped a button and the screen behind him changed. My models, my months of analysis, replaced by a bright pie chart with 3 segments and pastel colors. A child's version of reality. I leaned back in my chair and let him talk. He used all the right words: optimization, synergy, simplification. Words that meant nothing but sounded safe. When he finished, Daniel nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Collins, you'll support Dylan in implementing these adjustments. Keep the decks visually sharp. You have a good eye for that." A good eye for that. The echo of Aliner's voice came back so clearly I could almost smell the perfume from the dinner table. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but my voice stayed calm. I have some concerns about the risk model, Daniel. The simplified version ignores currency fluctuations in the Asian markets. If we remove those parameters, the projections will be fiction. Dylan gave a soft laugh. That's exactly what we're avoiding, Collins, overcomplicating. The board doesn't need an academic thesis. Clarity without accuracy is a story, I said quietly, not strategy. The room fell into a vacuum. No one looked at me. Daniel's jaw tightened. Let's keep this constructive. Dylan, proceed. For 40 minutes, I watched my work being dismantled. Years of data discipline reduced to slogans. People nodded because nodding was safer than questioning. When it was over, Dylan said, I'll need all the source files transferred to my drive by the end of the day. Collins, please make sure everything's formatted properly. You have a talent for presentation. The same poison, now from a different mouth. Of course, I said. I'll make sure everything is colored inside the lines. A few of the analysts looked down at their notebooks. They had caught the edge in my tone but would never acknowledge it. In this world, loyalty was a liability. After the meeting, I went straight to my office, shut the door, and opened the secure folder on my desktop. Every dataset, every version of the Helix framework, neatly archived. I copied them to an encrypted drive, labeling it Foundations. Then I opened LinkedIn and typed Dylan Cross. His profile was almost empty, which was strange for someone at his level. Only a list of roles at companies that no longer existed, a degree from a university he never named. I began digging deeper, cross-checking public filings and news archives. Within minutes, I found it. A boutique consultancy in Chicago dissolved 8 months ago after a breach of contract lawsuit. The managing partner was Dylan Cross. The details were sealed, but the timing matched too perfectly to be coincidence. I took a slow breath. He had been brought in to clean up, not to build. A knock came at the door. Sarah, my junior analyst, peeked in. Do you have a second? Always, I said. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and lowered her voice. That meeting was wrong. He used your slides. Everyone knows it. I smiled faintly. Business isn't about right or wrong, Sarah. It's about who can prove they were right first. I kept copies of the old models just in case, she whispered. Good girl. Keep them safe and start polishing your resume. The ship, about to change course. Her eyes widened, but she didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and left. By evening, the office had emptied. I stayed, listening to the hum of the servers. The city lights bled through the glass walls, painting everything in silver. At 8:30, I sent one email. No subject, no body, just an attachment, a comparison of my original projections and Dylan's simplified version. The recipient was Marian Hale. I clicked send and sat back. The massacre had begun, though no one felt the blood yet. When I left the building, the night was cold and dry. My reflection followed me in every window. Somewhere high above, the same stars that watch the rich and the powerful were watching me too. I wondered if they saw the pattern forming, the quiet geometry of revenge. The next morning I came in early, as I always did. The air in the office felt different now, heavier. People whispered near the elevators, the way they do when they sense someone important is about to fall. Daniel avoided my eyes in the hallway. Dylan smiled as though nothing had changed. Around noon, a meeting request appeared in my inbox. Helix review alignment, 3 p.m. mandatory attendance. When I entered the conference room, Marian was already there, seated beside Richard Vance and a leaner. Her presence made the air sharper. Daniel froze for a heartbeat before recovering his corporate grin. Dylan didn't even realize what her presence meant. Glad everyone's here, Richard said, adjusting his cufflinks. We're excited about the new direction. Marian's smile was polite but cold. I've been reviewing some of the data adjustments. Fascinating work, Dylan. Tell me, how did you achieve a 40% cost reduction without structural change? Dylan blinked. Streamlining. We focused on simplification. And you removed all hedging strategies, she said lightly. In a volatile currency environment, that's a bold move. His throat tightened. We expect stability in the region. Based on, she asked. He hesitated. The room waited. I leaned forward. Historical optimism, I said softly. Eleanor frowned, probably unsure if that was sarcasm. Marian looked directly at me. Collins, you built the original models, didn't you? Yes. Do you still have them? I do. Richard waved a dismissive hand. We don't need to get technical. Marian's tone never changed. We need to get factual. I opened my laptop. The room dimmed as the projector came to life. Graphs, not pretty colors, but sharp lines of truth. This is the original projection, I said. If the Singapore dollar shifts by even 3%, Helix loses £12 million in the first quarter alone. Dylan's model assumes zero fluctuation. That's not simplification, that's erasure. Dylan's voice rose. You're undermining the team. I'm correcting the math. The silence after that sentence was surgical. Marian spoke again, calm and precise. It appears Mr. Cross's version of strategy is missing rather essential details. Richard, I suggest we revisit leadership assignments on this account. Eleanor opened her mouth, but Marian's glance cut her off. Richard nodded stiffly. We'll discuss internally. The meeting ended with an air of quiet panic. Dylan gathered his notes without meeting my eyes. I didn't gloat. Not yet. Back in my office, I found an email from Marian. Nicely done. Coffee tomorrow. Same place. That night I dreamed of blueprints drawn in invisible ink. Every line was a calculation, every curve a consequence. When I woke, the plan had already started to form. The cafe was nearly empty the next morning. Marian sat by the window, the same seat she had occupied years ago when she first taught me that silence could be sharper than argument. She looked up as I approached. You handled that beautifully. Did I? She nodded. Richard called me last night. He's furious, mostly at Dylan, partly at himself. The board has lost patience. They're planning a major review. And you, I said, plan to be ready when it happens. She smiled. Always. I need documentation of everything he changed, every warning you gave. Build a record that no one can erase. When the quarter collapses, the board will need a savior. You'll already be standing there. The way she said it made it sound less like advice and more like prophecy. We talked for an hour about timelines, data trails, and contingencies. When I left, the rain had started again, gentle and cold. I thought of Dylan, probably preparing another deck filled with illusions, and felt a strange calm. He believed he had taken my place. He hadn't noticed that the ground beneath him was already moving. Back at the office, I worked late into the night. I traced every email, every data change, every deletion. I printed copies and stored them offsite. Sarah helped quietly, saying little, moving with the efficiency of someone who understood the stakes. 2 weeks passed. Helix continued to bleed money under the new strategy. Richard grew more irritable during calls. Daniel tried to keep the tone positive, repeating that adjustments were normal in transformation phases. I waited. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Dylan spent the previous 3 days rehearsing his presentation, locking himself in conference rooms with junior analysts. On the morning of the meeting, he stopped by my desk and smiled. Wish me luck. I looked up at him, steady. Luck is for people without numbers. He laughed as if I had complimented him and walked away. When he was gone, Sarah whispered, You're really going to do it, aren't you? I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just letting the truth speak at full volume. At 2 o'clock, we entered the boardroom. The walls were glass, the skyline stretching behind them. Richard sat at the head of the table, Eleanor beside him, Marian opposite, Dylan at the front, remote in hand, confidence radiating. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, today we unveil the new era of operational clarity for Helix Dynamics. He clicked the first slide. A word cloud appeared filled with vague optimism, synergy, transformation, vision. The board looked politely interested. He moved on, talking fast, skimming over numbers, replacing details with metaphors. When he reached the slide about the Asian operations, Marian interrupted. Mr. Cross, could you specify which redundancies you identified? He smiled too quickly. Mostly workforce optimization, vendor consolidation, standard efficiency measures. Interesting, she said. And the currency hedging? We found it unnecessary. Based on what data? He hesitated again. That was my moment. Would you like me to show the underlying numbers? I asked. Richard frowned but didn't stop me. I connected my laptop to the screen. My version appeared, filled with precise graphs, time-stamped audits, documented correspondence. These figures show a projected 23% variance ignored in the simplified version, I explained. At this rate, the company will lose £12 million before the next quarter. Dylan's face drained of color. This isn't the approved deck. Marian's voice was smooth as glass. The board asked for data, not decoration. The rest unfolded like slow theater. Questions, denials, evidence, silence, then the decision. Dylan was removed from the account pending review. Richard's expression had turned from irritation to fear. When the meeting ended, I packed my laptop quietly. Dylan approached me in the corridor, his voice low and furious. You think this is over? I met his eyes. No, it's just beginning. That evening, I received 2 messages. One from Marian, excellent work. Step 2 begins tomorrow, the other from Daniel, my office. Now, his window overlooked the river. Dylan was already there, pacing. Daniel's tone was clipped. You ambushed a client in a board meeting. Do you realize what that means for us? I presented facts. You went behind protocol. I sat down without asking. If you had listened when I raised those issues, there would have been no ambush. Dylan slammed his hand on the desk. You think you're smarter than everyone. No, I said softly, just more accurate. Daniel tried to regain control. Helix is reconsidering our partnership. They're talking about contract termination. This could destroy us. My phone buzzed. An email from Marian CC'd to Daniel and Richard. Effective immediately, Helix Dynamics will reassess consulting partnerships to ensure data integrity. Formal review Monday. I looked up at Daniel. Looks like they already decided. He stared at me. You planned this? No, I said, standing. You planned it when you chose appearance over substance. I just wrote down the math. I left before he could answer. The hallway lights reflected off the glass like 1,000 tiny exit signs. Sarah waited near the elevator holding a box. I figured you'd need this. You're psychic, I said. No, she replied. Just realistic. Marian's assistant called. They want your availability for transition planning next week. Tom from tech appeared beside her. Half the floor knows what's happening. If you're building something new, I'm in. I smiled. I haven't made an offer. You don't need to, Sarah said. The elevator arrived. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the office. Desks, screens, people who had watched quietly as others took credit. They would understand soon enough. Outside, the night air tasted like victory disguised as rain. When I reached home, I stood by the window again, watching the river move beneath the city lights. Somewhere across town, Daniel and Dylan were probably arguing, trying to salvage what could not be saved. Marian was already preparing the next move. I whispered to the glass, every empire falls the same way, one false number at a time. Then I turned off the light, opened my laptop, and began to design the future. The weekend came and went in silence. I spent most of it at home, watching the city from my window, listening to the sound of rain on glass. London always feels different when it rains. Quieter, more honest, like it knows how to keep secrets. I didn't open the news. I didn't check emails. I didn't need to. Somewhere out there, Dylan Cross was drowning in the consequences of his own invention, and Daniel was trying to find a way to keep his name off the casualty list. The game had already changed, and they were still pretending to play the old one. Sunday night, near midnight, my phone rang. The number was private. I hesitated before answering. Collins Row, I said. It's Marian, the voice replied. Calm, composed, sharp as always. I hope I didn't wake you. I was awake. Good, she said, because things are moving faster than I expected. Richard called me an hour ago. The board meeting is scheduled for Tuesday morning. He wants me to oversee the review. Dylan will present a revised strategy. They're giving him one last chance to justify himself. That's generous, I said, though my voice carried no humor. It's desperation, she corrected, but it works in our favor. I want you there. As what? The woman he stole data from? As the only person who can expose what he's hiding. There was a pause. I could hear the faint click of her pen on the other end, a habit she had when she was thinking. Bring everything, she continued. Emails, data, projections, timestamps. We'll make sure there's no confusion about who's responsible when this goes down. When this goes down, I repeated quietly. Yes, she said, because it will, and when it does, someone has to be standing on the right side of the collapse. Make sure it's you. The line went dead before I could answer. I stood for a long time, the city's dim lights reflected in the window. My own reflection looked different. Not angry, not even satisfied, just alert. Focused. The way a chess player looks before the final move. I opened my laptop and went to work. Every document, every line of code, every dataset Dylan had tampered with. I gathered proof of the deletions, the shortcuts, the missing forecasts. I built a timeline so precise it could double as a confession. At 2 a.m, I sent a single email to Sarah. Meet me at the office. Bring the backups. She replied within minutes. On my way. By the time she arrived, the rain had stopped. The city was wrapped in fog, streetlights glowing like ghosts. She came in wearing a hoodie and sneakers, her hair pulled back, no makeup, eyes sharp despite the hour. Is this about Tuesday? She asked. Yes. Are we doing something illegal? Only if you consider the truth illegal. That made her smile. Then I'm in. We worked through the night, syncing every file, cross-referencing email chains, building a private archive no one could erase. At some point, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You're not just saving your career, are you?" I looked up from the screen. What makes you say that? Because people who just want to survive don't look this calm. You're planning something bigger. I smiled faintly. I don't plan, I prepare. By dawn, we had everything. I locked the drive, labeled it Continuum, and handed it to her. Keep this with you. If anything happens, send it to Marian directly. She hesitated. Anything like what? Like someone realizing too late that the story they tried to write isn't theirs anymore. She nodded, tucking the drive into her bag. When I got home, the city was waking up. The sky was the color of paper before ink touches it. I made coffee, showered, dressed, and went back out. I wasn't tired. I felt alive. I had waited years to see the mask slip from the faces of men like Dylan Cross. And this time, I was holding the strings. At 9, I received another call. Not Marion, Daniel. His voice cracked with exhaustion. "Collins, we need to talk." "Do we? Please, not here, the cafe across from the office, 10 o'clock. I almost said no. Then I remembered that every empire falls from within. Fine. He was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, his tie loose, eyes red. For a moment, I saw the man who had once believed in me, the mentor who told me I was the best mind he'd ever hired. Then he looked up, and all I saw was fear. "They're killing the contract," he said. "Helix is dropping us. Do you understand what that means? 30% of our revenue gone overnight." "I understand exactly what it means," I said. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted his cup. "Dylan says you sabotaged him, that you shared internal data with their board. And you believe him?" He didn't answer. "Daniel," I said softly, "you taught me to build models based on truth, not narrative. Do you think I forgot that?" He sighed. "It doesn't matter what I think." "The partners are meeting today. They want a scapegoat before the story hits the press." "Then give them one," I said. "Give them the right one." "Marion?" "Dylan," I corrected. "By this time tomorrow, he'll have more to answer for than bad math." Daniel leaned closer. "You sound very sure of yourself." "I'm sure of the numbers," I said, "and numbers never lie." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if conceding a lost battle. "Whatever you're doing, Collins, be careful. You're playing with people who don't lose gracefully." "I know," I said. "That's why I never give them the chance." That afternoon, I met Marion at her office again. She was reviewing a report when I walked in, but she closed it immediately and gestured for me to sit. "Dylan's panicking," she said without preamble. "Richard," trying to shield him for now, but the board's already whispering. "They're expecting the Singapore numbers tomorrow. If they collapse, the fallout will be immediate." "They will collapse," I said. "Good," she replied. "That's when you step in." I frowned slightly. "You make it sound like you've already decided what happens next." "I have," she said. "When Dylan falls, the board will need someone to stabilize operations. You'll be that person. And you," her eyes glinted. "Let's just say I'm ready for a promotion of my own." I leaned back. "So this isn't just about cleaning up a bad strategy, it's about replacing the people at the top." She smiled, not denying it. "Sometimes change needs a reason. Dylan and Richard have kindly provided one." I thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "And if I refuse?" She laughed softly. "You won't. You've waited too long to let someone else write your story." She was right. When I left her office, the city was golden under the late afternoon sun. The Thames shimmered like molten glass. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't reacting to someone else's game, I was creating my own. That night, I received a message from Sarah. "Just saw Dylan in the parking garage. He looked pale. Someone called him from Helix. He left in a hurry." "Good," I replied. "Let him sweat." I didn't sleep. I watched the clock instead. Every hour that passed was another turn of the screw. Tuesday arrived like the sound of thunder before a storm. The boardroom at Helix was filled before I entered. Richard at the head, Eleanor beside him again, her expression tight. Marion across from them, her pen tapping lightly against her notebook. Dylan stood near the screen, trying to look composed, failing. When he saw me take a seat near the back, his jaw clenched. He knew. The meeting began with numbers, projections, charts. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Then came the inevitable question from Marion. "Mr. Cross, your model predicts a 14% rise in profit, yet the Singapore data shows a loss this quarter. How do you reconcile that?" He hesitated, shuffled papers. "Temporary fluctuations. We expect recovery within the next cycle." "Based on what evidence?" she asked. Silence, I leaned forward. "Would you like me to clarify?" Richard looked torn but nodded. "Go ahead." I connected my laptop. The graphs appeared again, the same ones as before, but now updated with real-time losses. "This is the current operational status," I said. "The numbers are not recovering. They're collapsing." Dylan's model didn't include exchange risk or vendor delays. "We warned about this 6 weeks ago. Those warnings were ignored." Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. "Are you suggesting incompetence?" "I'm suggesting facts," I said. The rest unfolded in slow motion. Questions, accusations, evidence. By the end of it, Dylan's career was over. Richard sat silent, staring at the table. Marion's expression was unreadable, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. When it was done, the board dismissed Dylan effective immediately. He left without a word, his face hollow. As we exited the room, Marian touched my arm lightly. "Well done, you handled it perfectly." "It was necessary," I said. "Necessary and elegant," she said. "That's rare." We walked together to the elevator. She pressed the button, then looked at me with that same assessing gaze she had years ago when I was still her student. "You know, Collins, you could go far beyond this. Helix isn't the limit. There are bigger games." "I'm not sure I'm playing a game," I said. She smiled faintly. "Then you've already won." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, but she didn't follow. "Where will you be tomorrow?" I asked. "In Richard's office," she said, "cleaning up the rest." The doors closed before I could reply. By the time I returned to my apartment, the story had already started to spread. Rumors on financial blogs. Helix executive ousted after strategic mismanagement. No names yet, but they would come. They always did. I poured myself a drink and stood by the window again. Across the city, the lights of Helix Tower still glowed, though one of those offices was now empty. I thought about Dylan, about the arrogance that had blinded him, about the way he smiled when he said simplicity was power. Maybe he was right. Simplicity was power. The simple truth that numbers don't lie had just ended his career. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Marian. "The board meets again tomorrow. They'll vote on Richard's position. I'll let you know the outcome. Sleep well, Collins, you've earned it." I set the phone down and looked out at the sleeping city. Somewhere behind those lights, people were still pretending to be in control. They hadn't realized yet that control doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who listens, who waits, who builds. And I had been building for a long time. The night stretched on, silent and vast. I felt neither guilt nor triumph, only clarity, the kind that arrives when the last illusion breaks. Tomorrow would begin a new phase, not survival, not revenge, construction. And when the dust settled, everyone would see what I had built. The morning after Dylan's fall was brighter than it should have been. The air carried the sharp clarity that follows a storm, the kind of brightness that feels like exposure. London was washed clean. Even the glass of the Helix Tower seemed to glitter harder in the sun. When I stepped through the revolving doors, I could sense the shift. People's eyes followed me in the lobby, not with pity or amusement this time, but curiosity. That subtle adjustment of posture that says they know something has changed and they are trying to guess whether to be afraid of you or to stand near you. Sarah met me by the elevator, holding a coffee. "You're trending," she said quietly. "On what?" "Internal chatter. Apparently you're the reason Dylan is gone. Someone leaked the meeting summary." I took the coffee and smiled. "Then someone understands the value of transparency." She grinned. "Or they just like drama." The elevator doors opened. "Same thing," I said and stepped in. On the top floor, Marian's assistant greeted me with professional warmth. "Ms. Hale asked me to send you straight in." Marian was standing by the window again, a habit of hers, hands behind her back, staring out at the skyline as if arranging it in her mind. She turned when she heard me. "Congratulations," she said. "You made the Financial Times this morning." I froze for a second. "What?" She handed me her tablet. There it was, the headline halfway down the business page. "Helix Dynamics cleans house after strategic collapse. Internal sources cite reckless simplification." There was no mention of names, but one paragraph quoted an unnamed senior consultant who had intervened to prevent a projected loss of £40 million. I read it twice. My name wasn't there, but it didn't need to be. The message was clear. Marian took the tablet back. "Perception is everything. Richard will survive this round barely. The board will demand visible change. That's when opportunity appears." I folded my arms. "Opportunity for whom?" "For us," she said simply. "Richard has asked me to oversee a temporary audit of internal systems. He needs a scapegoat for the lost data, and he can't use Dylan anymore. He also can't risk the board discovering what really happened with the Asian accounts." "What really happened?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "That's what we're going to find out. I want you to lead the analysis team, off the record." I studied her. "So this is still about cleaning up the mess?" "It's about finding out who created it," she replied. "And if that happens to create space for new leadership, so be it." I nodded slowly. "When do we start?" "Now." For the next week, my world became a maze of files, servers, and encrypted archives. Helix had layers of digital security, but like any structure built by humans, there were cracks where convenience had trumped caution. I worked late every night, tracing transaction logs, comparing them against physical invoices. The numbers didn't add up. Whole data sets were missing, not just deleted but overwritten. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide something. On the third night, Sarah brought sandwiches and 2 cans of energy drink. She spread the documents across the table. These look like vendor payments, but the codes don't match any registered accounts. I took a closer look. The names were generic, placeholders maybe, but the routing numbers led to shell companies scattered across different jurisdictions. They're siphoning funds, I said. Who? Not Dylan. He wasn't smart enough to build something this clean. Then who? Richard, I said quietly. Or someone protecting him. She looked at me. Should we tell Marion? I hesitated. Marion had asked me to find the truth, but something about this felt bigger than an audit. The precision of the concealment, the way the data was deleted minutes after each transfer, it was systematic. Not yet, I said finally. I need to understand the pattern. By midnight, the pattern began to emerge. Every missing file corresponded to a project listed under something called Horizon Initiative. I frowned at the name. It didn't appear anywhere in the official system. I searched deeper, cross-checking with archived emails until I found a message dated 18 months ago. It was from Richard to Dylan, subject line blank, body short. Continue Horizon quietly. No shared access. Use the Zurich node. My pulse quickened. Zurich meant offshore. Quiet meant illegal. I printed the email and stared at it under the desk lamp. The pieces clicked together. The losses in Singapore weren't just incompetence, they were cover. Richard had been funneling money into a side project, and Dylan had helped him bury the evidence. And now Dylan was gone. I sat back, realizing the weight of what I held. This wasn't corporate mismanagement, it was fraud. The kind that could destroy reputations, maybe even send people to prison. At that moment, Sarah's computer beeped. She looked up. What's that? System alert, she said. Someone just accessed the archive remotely. Who? She clicked through. Admin account, but the IP is internal. I rushed to my screen. The file directory was collapsing in real time. One by one, folders were disappearing. Backup drive, I said. She nodded, plugging in the encrypted disk we had labeled Continuum weeks ago. The transfer started, slow but steady. How long? She asked. 4 minutes, I said. Keep it running. We watched the progress bar crawl forward as file after file vanished from the main server. My heart pounded. Whoever was doing this knew exactly where to look. At 90%, the office lights flickered. Then the connection dropped. The screen went black. Sarah cursed softly. Power cut? No, I said. They pulled us off the grid. I stood, looking through the glass wall into the darkened hallway. Somewhere in the building, I could hear the hum of a generator kicking in. The emergency lights glowed faint red. Save whatever we have, I said. When the servers came back online 20 minutes later, the Horizon files were gone. Not just deleted, wiped. The backup had stopped at 87%, enough to show proof, not enough to rebuild the whole trail. Sarah exhaled shakily. Someone inside knew what we were doing. I nodded. And they wanted to make sure no one else does. The next morning, I confronted Marion. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she said, How much do you have left? 87%. That's enough. For what? For leverage, she said. The board doesn't need every detail, just enough to believe Richard compromised the company. You'll present what you have, I'll handle the rest. I studied her carefully. You knew this was bigger than Dylan, didn't you? I suspected, she said. But suspicion isn't evidence. Now we have both. Why didn't you tell me? She smiled faintly. Would you have looked as hard if I had? That was the first time I felt a flicker of doubt. I had been following her lead since the beginning, trusting her instincts, her calm logic. But in that moment, I realized she was always several moves ahead, and I wasn't sure whose victory she was planning. Still, I followed. That evening, she arranged a private meeting with 2 board members. We met at a quiet restaurant in Mayfair, the kind of place where conversations are never overheard. Marion introduced me, then handed them a folder of printed evidence. These transactions suggest a pattern of deliberate concealment, she explained. Ms. Rowe uncovered them during a systems review. One of the directors, a man named Hayes, flipped through the pages slowly. You're accusing the CEO of fraud? Marion smiled slightly. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm showing you the numbers. They speak for themselves. He looked at me. Are these authentic? Yes, I said, verified against the internal server before it was purged. His expression darkened. Purged? Marion nodded. Less than 12 hours after Ms. Rowe accessed the files. The implication was clear. By the time dinner ended, I knew the decision had already been made. Richard was finished. The board would meet in 48 hours. As we left the restaurant, Marion touched my arm. Good work tonight. It isn't over, I said. It will be soon, she replied. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. The image of the disappearing files kept looping in my mind, those folders vanishing one by one like erasing a life. Who had done it? Richard trying to protect himself? Someone loyal to him? Or someone closer to me? At 3 in the morning, I checked the backup again. One folder stood out, mislabeled, hidden among system logs. Inside was a single document, encrypted but recoverable. Its title made my stomach tighten. Horizon Stakeholders Private. I decrypted it carefully. The list was short. Richard Vance, yes. Dylan Cross, yes, but also another name, Marian Hale. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I read it again, slower this time. It was her. She had been part of Horizon from the beginning. She wasn't investigating Richard. She was cleaning the trail. The realization hit like cold water. I sat back, heart pounding. Every step she had guided me through, every instruction, every meeting, it had all served her purpose. I had been her instrument. I closed the file, locked it under triple encryption, and leaned back. My reflection in the dark window stared back at me, calm but different now. No more trust, no more illusion. I whispered to the glass, so that's how you want to play. By morning, I had a plan. I went to the office early, before anyone else. I copied the file onto a separate drive and slipped it into my bag. Then I opened my calendar and scheduled a meeting with Marian for that evening. Subject, Horizon clarification. All day, I went through motions. Meetings, emails, polite smiles. But underneath it all was a new kind of focus. A quieter fire. When I walked into Marian's office at 6, she was alone. "You look tired," she said. "Too many nights chasing ghosts." "Maybe," I said, sitting down. "But I caught one." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh," I placed the drive on her desk. "Horizon, I know you were part of it." Her face didn't change. "I see. You used me to erase the evidence. You needed someone credible to carry the story, someone who wouldn't be suspected." She smiled. "And it worked, didn't it?" I stared at her. "You let Richard and Dylan take the fall, but you were behind it all." "I was part of it," she said calmly. "Not behind it. There's a difference." "You manipulated me." "I guided you," she corrected. "You wanted power, Collins. I gave you the opportunity. Everything you did, you chose. Don't rewrite history now." I felt anger rise, sharp and clean. "What do you want from me?" "The same thing you want," she said. "A seat at the table that decides what happens next. Don't be naive. You've earned their respect now. They'll listen to you. And when they do, we'll reshape this company." I shook my head. "You mean you'll reshape it? I'll be your shield." She laughed softly. "We can both win, or we can both fall." "The choice is yours." I stood slowly. "You should be careful with threats, Marian." "Not a threat," she said. "A partnership, when you can't refuse." I turned and left without answering. Outside, the evening air felt heavy like the pause before a storm. I walked until the city lights blurred around me. She thought she still had control. She thought I was the same person who once looked up to her. But the truth was simpler. I had learned from the best. And now it was time to prove it. The morning of the board review began with sunlight so bright it felt wrong. London wasn't supposed to look that clean. It should have been raining, gray, dramatic. Instead, the sky was clear, almost arrogant. I took it as an omen. Not good or bad, just honest. When the city shows its bones, you see how fragile everything really is. I left my apartment early, dressed in black again, the same color I wore the day Eleanor Vance tried to humiliate me months ago. It had become a quiet uniform now, not of mourning but of control. The elevator ride down was long and silent. My reflection in the mirrored wall didn't look nervous. It looked ready. At the cafe across from Helix Tower, Sarah waited with a folder under her arm. She pushed it across the table as soon as I sat down. "Everything you asked for," she said. Inside were printouts, timestamps, audit trails, and the decrypted file listing Marian as part of Horizon. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "I'm not sure of anything anymore," I said, "but I know what happens if I don't. She'll come after you." "She already has," I said softly. "She just doesn't know it yet." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then I'll be in the server room at 11 like we planned. Once the board starts, you'll have a direct line to the live data feed. If anything goes wrong, I'll pull the plug." "Good," I said. "And Sarah?" "Yes. If this gets messy, walk away." "You're not part of it." She smiled faintly. "Too late for that." When I stepped back into the sunlight, I felt the hum of traffic under my feet. The city was moving fast, unaware that an empire was about to collapse inside one of its towers. The boardroom was already full when I arrived. The air smelled of polished wood and tension. Richard sat at the head of the table, pale and tight-lipped. Marian was beside him, calm as always, flipping through her notes. She didn't look at me when I entered, but I could feel the weight of her awareness like heat on my skin. Daniel was there too, summoned as a representative of my former firm. His eyes met mine briefly, a silent question he didn't dare ask. He looked smaller now, older, like someone who had seen the truth too late. Eleanor stood behind Richard's chair, her expression carved in ice. Whatever loyalty she had left was now theater. The chairman cleared his throat. This session will review the integrity of the Horizon Initiative and the subsequent data loss. Ms. Hale, you may begin. Marian stood. Her voice was measured, controlled, every syllable crafted for persuasion. As you all know, Horizon was designed as a strategic investment framework to expand Helix's presence in emerging markets. Unfortunately, several irregularities occurred during implementation. Our investigation indicates that Mr. Vance and external consultants mismanaged critical assets. Her words painted Richard as careless but salvageable, the kind of narrative that protected the company and left the board a convenient villain to punish. She was brilliant, I'll give her that. She knew how to sound objective while cutting arteries. When she finished, she gestured toward me. Ms. Rowe has been assisting with forensic analysis. Collins, please present your findings. I stood slowly, aware that every eye in the room had turned toward me. I could feel Marian watching, confident that I would deliver exactly what she expected. Thank you, I said. The investigation into Horizon uncovered multiple deleted files and unrecorded transactions. Most were erased during a late-night purge 2 weeks ago. However, our backup retained key fragments that reveal the structure of the project. I tapped the screen and the projection lit up. Lines, nodes, routes, names. The network of shell accounts stretched like a spider web. A few murmurs rippled around the table. Each transfer corresponds to unapproved expenditures totaling more than £52 million, I continued. The pattern suggests coordination, not error. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I said evenly. I'm presenting data. Marian smiled faintly, pleased. She thought I was still following her script. I let her think so. Full list of stakeholders, I went on, is contained in an encrypted log recovered from the deleted server. I'll project it now. I could hear Marian's pen stop tapping. That tiny sound told me she understood what was coming. The list appeared on the screen. Richard Vance, Dylan Cross, and then her name, Marian Hale. A silence deeper than shock filled the room. It wasn't disbelief. It was the sound people make when they realize the ground under them has vanished. Richard's head snapped toward her. What is this? Marian didn't flinch. Fabrication, she said smoothly. Collins must have been misled by corrupted files. I met her eyes. The data is authenticated by system logs and verified checksum. It was retrieved from your private terminal, timestamped 18 months ago. You initiated Horizon's creation. The chairman leaned forward. Is that true, Ms. Hale? Marian's composure wavered for the first time. I was asked to oversee a pilot program. Richard approved it. Richard slammed his palm on the table. You told me it was an R&D test. You hid the transfers. Her tone sharpened. You signed the authorizations. The room erupted in voices, overlapping, accusing. I stood quietly, watching chaos bloom like ink in water. This was the moment I had been building toward, not revenge, not redemption, clarity. When the shouting faded, the chairman turned to me. Ms. Rowe, what do you recommend? I met his gaze. Transparency. Publish the audit. Replace compromised leadership. Restore credibility before the market finds out on its own. He nodded slowly. Noted. Marian gathered her papers, her movements deliberate. This is a mistake, she said. Collins doesn't understand what she's unleashed. I looked at her. No, I understand perfectly. You taught me. She held my stare for a long moment, then left the room. The door closed softly behind her, quieter than it should have been. The board voted within the hour. Richard was suspended pending legal review. Marian's position was under evaluation. The statement would go public the next morning. When I stepped out into the corridor, Daniel was waiting. You just took down 2 of the most powerful people in this company, he said. I didn't take them down, I replied. They fell. I just held up a mirror. He smiled sadly. You always did like precision. Precision is the only thing that lasts, I said. Outside the building, the sky had shifted again, clouds rolling in from the west. The first drops of rain hit the pavement as I stood under the awning. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. It worked. She's gone. I didn't reply. I just watched the rain spread across the city like a slow erasure. That evening, I met Sarah at a quiet bar near the river. She looked relieved, almost giddy. You did it, she said. Marian's out. The board is already offering you interim oversight of the audit division. I ordered a drink. Temporary, I said. For now, she replied, but everyone knows it's permanent if you want it. I looked out the window. The reflection of the city lights rippled on the water. Be careful what you build, I said softly. It always wants to own you back. She tilted her head. What do you mean? Marian didn't start as a villain, she just forgot where the lines were. It's easy to forget when you're holding the pen. Sarah nodded slowly. So what now? Now we finish what we started, I said. Helix still has rot in its walls. Someone has to rebuild it properly. As we left the bar, the rain had eased into mist. The streets glowed under the lamps. I felt lighter but not free. Victory never felt like triumph to me. It felt like silence after too much noise. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Helix purges leadership after internal scandal. Anonymous analyst exposes hidden fraud. New era of accountability promised. No one needed to say my name. It was in every whisper, every meeting. My inbox overflowed with congratulations I didn't answer. At noon, an email arrived from an unknown address. No subject, no body, just an attachment. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single line of text. Power never changes hands. It only changes masks. No signature, but I knew who it was from. Marian. I sat back, the words echoing in my head. Somewhere out there she was watching, waiting, maybe even planning her return. And maybe she was right. Maybe power didn't change hands. Maybe it just found new shapes. That evening, I walked through the Helix offices, now half empty. People smiled when they saw me, some out of respect, others out of calculation. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The lights buzzed softly above, the hum of machines constant, comforting in its indifference. In Richard's former office, the view stretched across the entire city. I stood by the window the same way Marian used to and finally understood why she loved this angle. From here, everything looked orderly. Streets became lines, buildings became shapes, chaos turned into geometry, the illusion of control. The phone on the desk rang. It was the chairman. Collins, the board would like to make your appointment official. Audit director with full autonomy. Are you ready to accept? I looked out at the city again. Yes, I said. I'm ready. After the call ended, I remained there, watching the light fade over London. Below, the river reflected the last traces of sun. I thought of Dylan, Richard, Marian, all the architects of their own downfall. And then I thought of myself, standing in the place they once stood. Power never changes hands. It only changes masks. Maybe she was right, but if so, I had just learned how to wear mine perfectly. The days after the board's decision passed in a blur of meetings, interviews, and congratulatory emails I barely read. People I had never spoken to before suddenly wanted lunch, advice, or alignment. They smiled too quickly, shook my hand too long, and said they had always believed in me. The air in the Helix Tower felt lighter but also emptier, like a house after a storm when the windows are open, but no one dares to speak. By the end of the week, I had a new office on the top floor. The desk still smelled faintly of Richard's cologne, the drawers perfectly arranged as if he planned to return. I left them untouched. On the wall behind the desk hung a painting of a horizon glowing orange over calm water. I wondered if he had chosen it for the name of his secret project. I almost took it down, but something about its stillness made me leave it there. Sarah came in with a stack of reports. These are the interim audits. We traced all active contracts. No more hidden accounts. Good, I said. Send the final version to the board. She nodded but hesitated. You should know something else. Marian called this morning. What did she want? She asked if you'd visit her. I looked up. Where? At her apartment. She said she's leaving London, wanted to talk before she goes. I leaned back in my chair. Through the window, the city stretched beneath me, glass and motion and noise that never stopped. Did she sound angry? Sarah shook her head. Calm, almost relieved. I smiled faintly. Then she's planning something. Still, I went. Her apartment overlooked the river. When she opened the door, she looked the same as ever, composed, elegant, as if she were hosting a dinner rather than facing exile. The table by the window was set for two. A bottle of wine waited unopened. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said. You always knew I would, I replied. She gestured to a chair. Sit, we have unfinished business. I sat but didn't touch the glass she poured. She took a slow sip of her own and said, You were magnificent in that meeting. Calm, surgical, I taught you well. You used me, I said. She tilted her head. And you used me, that's what partnership is, you just happened to win. I didn't want to win like this. Yes, you did, she said softly. You just didn't know it until you felt what it was like to hold the knife. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of traffic drifted faintly through the window. She finally said, Do you know why I started Horizon? To steal. To survive, she corrected. After 20 years in this business, I realized integrity doesn't keep you employed. Vision does. I built Horizon as insurance. Richard turned it into greed. I tried to control it. Then you came along. You could have stopped, I said. She smiled sadly. So could you? I looked down at my untouched wine. What now? I'm leaving, she said. Zurich maybe, or Singapore, I still have connections. Before I go, I wanted to see if you'd learned the most important lesson. And what's that? That everyone you save will eventually want your place. I stood slowly. You're wrong. No, she said, I'm patient. One day you'll understand, when you look around and realize no one's beside you anymore. I turned to leave. Goodbye, Marion. As I reached the door, she said, don't forget, I know where the bodies are buried. I didn't answer. I just closed the door behind me and walked out into the night. Outside, the wind had picked up. The air smelled of rain and river. I stood on the bridge watching the water move, thinking of her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe power always ends in solitude, but solitude had never scared me. Lies did. Over the next month, the company changed shape. Richard resigned officially, citing health reasons. The board appointed me Director of Strategic Integrity, a title so polished it could hide anything. My job was to rebuild trust, restructure systems, and restore confidence. I did all three. Helix's share price climbed. Investors called me visionary. Employees called me impossible. Both descriptions were true. I worked from dawn until night, sleeping in short bursts on the office couch. Sarah sometimes left food on my desk without speaking. She had grown quieter since the scandal, watching everything, learning. I saw the reflection of who I used to be in her, curious, idealistic, loyal. I wondered how long it would last before she, too, realized what Marion meant. One night, long after everyone had left, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No name. Inside was a newspaper clipping. Former executive Marion Hale joins Zurich Advisory Group. Below it, a handwritten note. The horizon never ends. I smiled despite myself. She was alive, unbroken, already reinvented. Maybe she always would be. I folded the note and locked it in the drawer. 2 weeks later, the new fiscal report came in. Record profits, clean books. A press article titled The Woman Who Saved Helix. They described me as a silent force of order, a symbol of integrity. I read it once, then deleted the link. That night Daniel called. It had been months since we spoke. I saw the article, he said. You really did it. I fixed what you wouldn't, I replied. He laughed softly. And now you're alone at the top. How does it feel? Quiet, I said. He hesitated. Careful with quiet, that's when ghosts start talking. When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. The city outside my window looked endless, but for the first time it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like containment, a glass world I had built around myself. One evening, Sarah knocked softly and came in. There's something you should see, she said, placing a file on my desk. What is it? Transactions flagged by compliance. Small amounts spread across multiple vendors. At first I thought it was routine, but the pattern repeats. Same routing logic as Horizon. I frowned. Impossible, we shut that down. I know, she said. That's why I checked twice. I opened the file. The codes were different, but the architecture was identical. Someone was rebuilding the system. Who has access? I asked. 3 people, she said. You, me, and the chairman. Run a full trace, I said. She hesitated. If it leads to the board, then we start over again. She nodded and left. I sat alone with the file open in front of me, lines of numbers glowing softly on the screen. Somewhere in the data, I could almost hear Marion's voice. The horizon never ends. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the empty office, past rows of silent desks, down to the server room. The hum of machines filled the air, steady and endless. I touched one of the servers lightly, feeling the faint vibration beneath my palm. Information moving. Secrets being born. I whispered, "You never stop, do you?" The machine didn't answer, of course. It just kept working, loyal to whoever fed it the right commands. By dawn, Sarah returned with results. "It's the chairman," she said quietly. "He's rerouting corporate funds through consulting shells. Smaller scale, but same mechanism. He must have learned from Horizon." I closed my eyes. "And he thinks he's invisible." "What do we do?" she asked. I looked at her, at the exhaustion in her young face, the same determination that once drove me. "We document everything. This time, we don't let it spread. And then we decide if we destroy it or use it." She frowned. "Use it? Information is currency, Sarah. Sometimes holding it is safer than spending it." She didn't answer. She just nodded and left. When the door closed, I opened a blank file and started typing a single line. Every system contains its own replacement. Outside, the city was waking. I watched the light crawl across the floor and thought of Marion standing by the window on mornings like this, watching the same light, believing she controlled it. Maybe none of us ever did. Maybe control was just the illusion we served to justify the things we couldn't stop ourselves from doing. I leaned back and whispered, "The horizon never ends." And for the first time, I wasn't sure whether that was a warning or a promise. The invitation came printed on thick cream paper, the kind that still smells faintly of ink. It was from the chairman himself: private dinner, board and partners, Le Calais, 8 o'clock, the same restaurant where everything had started. I laughed when I read it. Circles always close whether we want them to or not. When I arrived, the lights inside were soft and golden, exactly as they had been months ago. The same long table, the same wine, even the same pianist playing quiet jazz near the bar. Only the faces had changed. Richard's seat was empty, Marian's name no longer on the list. In their places were new board members and consultants whose smiles shone with cautious admiration. "Collins," the chairman said as I entered, "you saved this company. Tonight we celebrate you." He raised his glass and everyone followed. Applause, the kind that sounds expensive. I smiled, said thank you, sat down, and played my part. But my eyes drifted to the end of the table where a leaner Vance was sitting again, graceful as ever, wearing the same kind of pearl earrings she had that first night. She caught me watching her and smiled. It wasn't cruel this time, it was curious. Halfway through the meal, she leaned closer. "Strange, isn't it?" she said. "How power rearranges the room." "Yes," I said. "Chairs stay the same, only the names change." She lifted her glass. "To survival." "To memory," I said, and clinked lightly against hers. The food arrived, elegant and tasteless. People talked about growth, innovation, philanthropy. I listened but heard nothing. My mind wandered to the data Sarah had shown me, the new hidden transactions, the same mechanism resurrected under another name. The system was rebuilding itself, just like Marian said it would. At dessert, the chairman stood and made a speech about vision, courage, and new horizons. The word hit me like a whisper from a ghost. I glanced at the painting on the wall near the entrance, an abstract swirl of gold and blue that looked like a rising sun. Horizon again, it was everywhere. A symbol, a curse, or maybe just a reminder that endings are temporary. After dinner, I excused myself and walked toward the terrace. The air outside was crisp, the city humming quietly below. Sarah found me there a few minutes later. "I traced the new accounts," she said softly. "You were right, the chairman's behind it." "How much?" I asked. "Not as big as before, but it's growing. He's using consulting shells registered under a new subsidiary. Does anyone else know?" "No, not yet." I looked out over the river. The lights shimmered against the water like coded signals. "Then we hold the information, wait until it's large enough to matter." She hesitated. "That's what Marian did." "I know," I said, "but this time I decide how it ends." She studied me. "Are we becoming them?" "Maybe," I said, "or maybe we were them all along. We just didn't have the keys yet." She didn't reply. We stood in silence, the sound of laughter drifting from inside. When she finally left, I stayed, staring at the skyline until the windows blurred. Somewhere out there, Marian was reading the same headlines I was writing now. Somewhere she was smiling. When I returned to the table, the guests were preparing to leave. The chairman approached me, his tone warm. "Exceptional presentation earlier. The board is impressed. They're thinking of expanding the integrity division globally. You'd lead it, of course." "Of course," I said. He smiled. "You remind me of Marian in her early years. Sharp, fearless, don't lose that." "I won't," I said and watched him walk away. Later, as I stepped outside, a waiter handed me an envelope. "For you, miss," he said. I opened it as I walked. Inside was a single note in handwriting I knew too well. "Dinner looked lovely. Next time, try the dessert. It's worth staying for." No signature. No address, just the echo of a voice that refused to disappear. At home, I poured myself a drink and stood by the window. The city looked the same as always, alive, sleepless, indifferent. I thought about the people I had outlasted, the lines I had crossed, the lines still waiting to be drawn. My reflection in the glass looked calm, almost kind. But behind my eyes was something else, something that understood what Marian had meant all along. Power doesn't end. It changes shape, changes mask, changes owner. I raised the glass to my reflection. "To the horizon," I whispered. And somewhere in the distance, maybe in Zurich, maybe in the memory of my own ambition, Marian's voice answered in silence. "The horizon never ends."